The flames crackled in the center of our gathering, flickering against the faces of my pack. The air smelled of burnt wood and damp soil, a reminder of how simple our life was, how fragile. Every gaze was locked on me, waiting, expecting. "We have to make a decision," I said, my voice steady. "Survival comes first." One of the elders, a wiry man with graying hair, folded his arms.
"Valeria, we all know you are capable of protecting us. We don't have any doubts, but as every pack is trying to destroy us and take our place, you must take a big step to avoid these."
I inhaled sharply, my fingers tightening around the fabric of my cloak. I already knew what they wanted. "I know," I answered, my words feeling heavier than they should. "I am ready to marry Alpha Ronan. I will meet him tomorrow with you all." A few heads dipped in approval. Others remained silent. Some looked relieved, but I didn't miss the flicker of sadness in a few faces. Then my gaze landed on him. Brian. He wasn't looking at me like the others. His expression was dark, his lips pressed together like he was forcing himself to stay quiet. His broad shoulders were tense, his hands clenched at his sides. I knew that look. I had seen it once when I told him I had to leave for a week to settle a dispute with another pack. Back then, he let me go without a word. But this was different. "We will discuss it in the morning. Good night," I said, forcing myself to turn away. The pack began to scatter, murmuring quietly as they disappeared into their dens. The night breeze carried the scent of pine and damp moss, a familiar comfort. But Brian didn't move. He just stood there, unmoving, watching me. I swallowed. "Brian, come inside my den." He didn't answer, but after a few moments, he followed me. Inside, the fire cast long shadows along the stone walls. The space was small but warm, filled with things I had collected over the years. Animal pelts, wooden carvings, old books I never had the time to read. Brian stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his jaw tight.
"So is that what you want?"
He finally asked. I turned to him, meeting his gaze. "Brian, you have to understand my responsibility. I have to protect my people,"
"Great.
he said, voice laced with bitterness.
And what about me? What about us? It's over, isn't it?"
His words cut deeper than I expected. I stepped forward, reaching for him, but he took a step back. "It's not like that," I whispered. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head.
"Then what is it, Valeria? Because from where I'm standing, you're selling yourself to a brute for power."
I didn't flinch, because I had already thought the same thing. "I have a plan," I said carefully. "I will marry Ronan, and after a week I'll pretend he's brutal and abusive. I'll demand separation and take the wealth he offers me as compensation. Then, with that money, we can rebuild our pack, live safely, and then we will get married." Brian's brows furrowed.
"And why can't you just marry me now?"
I sighed. "Brian, you know why. After my father's death, we've been barely getting by. We struggle for food, for clothing. Our people deserve more. Ronan has everything: power, wealth, control. It's easy to take it from him, and once I do, we will be happier than ever." Brian scoffed, running a hand through his thick, dark hair.
"I don't like this idea at all."
He paused, his expression unreadable.
"Tell me one thing. Do you really love me?"
His voice was quieter this time, almost fragile. I stepped closer, my fingers grazing his arm. "Of course, my love," I murmured. "I love you, and we will get married soon." He studied my face for a long moment before sighing.
"As you wish."
I reached for his hand, lacing my fingers with his. Brian, this will change our way of life. I pulled him toward me. Come here. Hesitation flickered in his eyes, but he stepped forward, allowing me to close the distance. The warmth of his body against mine was familiar, comforting. I tilted my face up, brushing my lips against his. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, slowly, he wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me flush against him. The tension between us shifted, melting into something else, something deeper. I kissed him again, this time more firmly. His lips were warm, rough, like they had memorized every kiss we had shared before. My fingers found the back of his neck, tracing the edge of his hairline. He exhaled against my skin, his breath warm and uneven. Then he pulled away slightly.
There's no meaning to these kisses if you're marrying Ronan.
There is, I whispered. There's meaning in everything between us. His hands slid down my arms, his fingers brushing against my wrists.
I just don't want to lose you.
You won't, I promised. Just trust me. His gaze held mine for a long moment before he finally leaned in again, capturing my lips with his. This time, he didn't hesitate. He kissed me deeply, with the kind of passion that made my head spin. His fingers tightened around my waist, pulling me even closer. I felt the heat of his body, the quiet desperation in the way he held me. I melted into him, my arms wrapping around his neck as I deepened the kiss. There was something intoxicating about the way he held me, as if he was afraid to let go, as if this moment was the only thing keeping him from breaking apart. Slowly, we sank onto the furs covering the ground. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. His fingers traced idle patterns on my back, his touch lingering. I pressed another soft kiss to his lips, savoring the way he sighed into it. The world outside was silent, but in here, in this moment, everything felt warm, safe. Tomorrow, I would face Ronan. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight belonged to us. I woke up to the cold emptiness beside me. The space where Brian had been was now nothing but rumpled sheets and fading warmth. My body still ached from last night, my skin tingling with the memory of his touch, but the moment was gone. Reality had returned like an unwelcome guest. I sat up, adjusting my dress, which had slipped off one shoulder, exposing the bare skin near my arm. The morning light streamed through the small opening of my den. I let out a quiet sigh, pulling the fabric back in place, smoothing out the wrinkles as if that could erase the mess inside my mind. Stepping outside, I found my pack already gathered, ready to leave for the fortress. They were chatting, their voices filled with anticipation. Today was a big day for them. A change, a chance at a better life. Brian stood among them, dressed and prepared, but his face gave him away. He wasn't like the others, excited or hopeful. No, he looked distant, lost in thought. His eyes, usually warm and full of mischief, were empty. I knew what he was thinking. Last night, we weren't just two bodies tangled together. We were one. A single soul burning with passion, whispering promises that had no place in this world. But now, that night had passed. The morning had stolen it away. I straightened my posture and asked, "So? Everyone's ready?" My pack members tilted their heads in silent agreement. But Brian, he stayed still. No response, no movement. His silence was deafening, a quiet protest. I didn't acknowledge it. I couldn't. I was determined, and nothing, not even Brian's silent pain, could stop me. This marriage was the only way. The easiest way. Money, security, power. It was all within reach, and I wasn't about to let emotions cloud my judgment. I turned back toward my den and grabbed my best dress. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean. A deep brown fabric, simple yet fitting, cinched at the waist just enough to highlight my curves. I ran my fingers through my dark hair, taming the strands into place. I couldn't transform into a princess overnight, but I could at least look presentable. As I stepped forward, Brian approached me. He leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear.
Don't pretend to be someone you're not.
He murmured, his voice low, edged with frustration. I didn't respond. There was no point. He already knew my answer. With one final look at my pack, I led them toward the fortress. The fortress loomed before us, massive and imposing, its stone walls stretching high into the sky. It was the kind of place we had only heard about, never imagined stepping foot inside. The guards at the gate were stiff, alert, their expressions unreadable. One of them stepped forward.
Who are you?
I held my head high. I am Valeria. I'm here to deal with your king. The guard's eyes flickered with curiosity before he turned to another soldier.
Wait here. We will inform the king.
Two of them disappeared behind the large iron gates. My pack murmured amongst themselves, their voices filled with wonder.
It's massive. Look at the walls. They must be 5 times our height. I bet the inside is even grander.
I glanced at them, then at Brian. Unlike the others, he wasn't looking at the fortress. He was looking at me. Not with admiration, not with awe, just a quiet, unwavering stare. I met his gaze and smiled, but he didn't smile back. The sound of heavy footsteps pulled my attention away. The gates opened, and Alpha Ronan emerged. He was everything I expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, and effortlessly commanding. His deep blue tunic was embroidered with golden threads, his trousers made from the finest material. Everything about him screamed power and wealth. His eyes scanned me, his expression unreadable.
Yes?
I stepped forward. I am Valeria. We live in the forest. I saw you once when you crossed our land. He raised an eyebrow.
And?
I liked you. You are charming, handsome. There's a magnet inside you pulling me closer. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips.
I see.
He crossed his arms.
So what's your deal?
I exhaled softly. I'm here to offer you marriage. My pack is struggling. We lost our alpha. You are our king, our strongest leader. I came to you with hope, not just for myself, but for my people. Ronan didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on me, but not on my face. His eyes lingered lower, shamelessly taking their time. I realized then, he wasn't just powerful. He was something else, something playful, something dangerously unpredictable. He stepped aside and motioned toward the gates.
Come inside.
The guards bowed their heads as we entered. The fortress was unlike anything I had ever seen. Stone pillars stretched high above us, holding an arched ceiling adorned with chandeliers. The walls were lined with paintings, golden candle holders, and silk drapes. The floors gleamed under the soft light, polished to perfection. My pack members whispered excitedly, marveling at the luxury surrounding them.
Guards,
Ronan called out.
welcome my guests properly. Show them their rooms.
He turned back to me.
A special room for Valeria.
His gaze lingered again. That same look, unapologetic, bold. I met his eyes, holding my ground. If this was going to be a game, I needed to play it well. The guards led us down the long hallways. My pack followed eagerly, their eyes dancing with excitement. I was given a room at the end of the hall. As the doors opened, my breath caught for a moment. It was big, beautiful, A large bed covered in rich silk, a fireplace crackling gently, golden-framed mirrors reflecting the flickering light. The scent of fresh roses filled the air. There was a dressing table, an armoire, and a balcony that overlooked the grand courtyard. I stepped inside, running my fingers along the carved wooden edges of the bedpost. This wasn't just a room. It was a different world. I turned and shut the door behind me, locking it. A deep breath, a slow exhale. This was it. I had stepped into the lion's den, and now the real game was about to begin. A knock at the door pulled me out of my thoughts. I turned toward it, smoothing the fabric of my dress over my hips. I already knew who it was before I even opened the door. Ronan. His presence filled the doorway, tall and composed, his dark eyes scanning me as if he was seeing me for the first time. A slow, knowing smile curved his lips.
Can I come in?
His voice was rich, deep, commanding yet amused, like he already knew I wouldn't refuse him. I stepped aside. Of course, it's all yours. He walked in without hesitation, his movements unhurried, like a man who owned everything around him. He lowered himself into a chair near the window, stretching out one leg while keeping his piercing gaze locked on me.
You want to marry me?
He asked, his tone unreadable. I met his stare without hesitation. Yes, my king. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe amusement.
And what about your pack?
If you allow it, they can join yours. They are well-trained, skilled warriors. You can use them in battle. Ronan tilted his head slightly, rubbing his fingers together as if weighing his thoughts.
I see. So this is a deal then?
If you say so, I replied smoothly. But I truly like you, Ronan. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips.
I need time to think. Is that acceptable?
Of course.
Then stay here with your pack as my guests until I decide.
I gave him a small smile. As you wish. Ronan stood, his presence filling the space once more. He lingered for a moment before stepping out, closing the door behind him. The moment he was gone, I exhaled deeply. My fingers pressed lightly against my arms. The room suddenly felt too quiet, too still. I wasn't sure if I had played my cards right, or if I needed to try harder. I left my room to find Sarah. She was standing outside, watching our pack members settle in. Sarah, I called softly. She turned to me, her sharp green eyes narrowing slightly. What is it? Do you think it will be easy to convince Alpha Ronan? Sarah's lips curled in amusement. One thing I know, you are beautiful. If you can make him want you, you'll succeed. I swallowed, turning her words over in my mind. All right, let's see if I made the right decision. You did. I gave her a small nod and turned away, making my way back toward my room. But just as I reached the hallway, I spotted Brian. He was leaning against the stone wall, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His expression was unreadable, but I knew him too well. He was furious. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice low.
I need to talk.
He said. I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside my room, holding the door open for him. He walked in, closing the door behind him a little harder than necessary. His jaw was clenched.
Did you see where Ronan's eyes were?
I let out a slow breath. I know, Brian. But this is temporary. We'll overcome it. Once I get what we need, we'll be together. His hands curled into fists at his sides.
Has he accepted your proposal?
Not yet. But he will. Brian let out a sharp breath, running a hand through his hair.
And when your pack finds out about us, Will they accept me?
They are my people. Your people, too. I won't tell them until I get the money after the divorce. Brian's jaw tensed. His dark eyes burned into mine.
I can't wait, Valeria. I love you. Do this quickly. I get angry when I see him scanning you like you're his possession. Do you understand me?
I reached for him, my fingers brushing against his cheek. I know, Brian. Everything will be fine. His breath hitched, and then he pulled me into a kiss, desperate, demanding. My fingers curled into his shirt, holding him close. He kissed me like he was afraid this was the last time. When we finally pulled apart, Brian's expression was pained.
I am not happy, Valeria.
He murmured.
You know that. Be ready for consequences.
I frowned. What do you mean?
I know. I will loose you.
Brian said. I replied, Not at all. Why do you think so? He didn't answer. He just turned and walked out, his shoulders stiff, his steps heavy with frustration. I sat on the edge of the bed, my fingers pressing into the fabric of my dress. A knock at the door made me look up.
Madam,
A guard said.
it's time for dinner. Join the king at the dining table with your people.
I smoothed my dress and stood. I'll be there. The guard bowed slightly and walked away. I opened my chest of clothing and pulled out a gown, simple but beautiful, with a neckline that hinted at my curves without revealing too much. I laced a corset underneath, enhancing my shape. My hair cascaded down my shoulders in soft waves. I wasn't royalty, but I could make them believe I was. Just as I finished, something strange happened. My vision blurred and suddenly, I wasn't in my room anymore. A dark, dense forest surrounded me. The fog in the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something unnatural. A figure emerged from the shadows. A woman. She wore a black dress that trailed behind her, the fabric whispering against the forest floor. Her hat was tall, with a sharp, curved point. Her fingers were long, her nails razor-sharp. Her lips curled into a sinister smile. Her eyes gleamed like polished obsidian. And as she lifted one hand, I saw long, intricate markings running down her wrist. She moved slowly, deliberately, like she had all the time in the world. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. He belongs to me. I followed her gaze and saw Ronan. He stood motionless near her, his face blank, his body unnaturally still. His eyes were open, but they were lifeless, like he wasn't in control of himself. The woman extended her hand toward him. Dark energy crackled around her fingers. Then, the vision shattered. I gasped, my hands clutching my dress. I was back in my room, standing in front of the mirror. My heart raced. That wasn't a dream. I was wide awake. It was a vision, and it wasn't just a warning. Someone, or something, had sent it to me. I pressed my fingers against my temples. Who was that woman? Why did she have Ronan? And why did it feel like this was only the beginning? I had no answers, but one thing was certain. Whatever I had stepped into was far more dangerous than I had ever imagined, and there was no turning back. The dining hall was grand, with golden chandeliers hanging above, casting a soft glow over the long table where Ronan sat, surrounded by his most trusted men. The scent of roasted meat, spiced wine, and fresh-baked bread filled the air, making my stomach tighten with anticipation. As I entered, Ronan's gaze landed on me instantly. It was slow, deliberate, assessing. His eyes traveled down my body like he was memorizing every curve. There was something raw in the way he looked at me, like a man who had seen many women before, but none quite like me. I knew that look. It was hunger. My pack members were seated at the far end, blending in with Ronan's warriors. I caught Brian's stare from across the room. His jaw was tight, his eyes dark with something that wasn't just anger. It was pain. He didn't approve of my dress, I could see that. The neckline, the way my corset lifted my body parts, the way my gown hugged my waist. But I ignored him. He had to understand. This was strategy. I stepped closer to Ronan and gave a slight bow of my head. My king. His gaze flicked up to meet mine again. This time, it lingered at my throat before drifting downward, slow and deliberate. His lips curved into the faintest smirk.
Please sit.
His voice was smooth, almost lazy, but there was something sharp underneath it. I took my seat beside him. The food smelled incredible, and I forced myself to eat with measured grace. I could feel Ronan's eyes on me, even when he wasn't looking directly. He was intrigued, I could tell. Every glance, every stolen moment of observation, it was all falling into place. Our conversation was light, filled with small gestures that made me seem charming without being too eager. I let my fingers brush over the rim of my goblet as I sipped my wine, played with the pendant on my necklace when I spoke. Ronan noticed every movement. After dinner, I turned to him, my voice soft. My king, would you care for a walk? His brows lifted slightly, as if he hadn't expected it, but then he gave a slow nod.
As you wish.
Brian looked away the moment I rose. He was furious. I could feel it, but this wasn't about him. Outside, the night was cool, and the air smelled of damp earth and the faint sweetness of night-blooming flowers. The fountain glistened under the moonlight, its gentle trickling sound filling the silence between us. I slipped my arm through Ronan's without hesitation. His skin was warm, firm. It's beautiful, I murmured, letting my fingers lightly trail over his wrist. Ronan exhaled, his expression unreadable.
Valeria, if you marry me, you must understand one thing. I will be your king. Your pack will belong to me. I will rule over them, as I rule over this fortress. There will be no shared power.
I stopped walking, staring up at him. His words were clear, a warning, a declaration, that everything I had once controlled would be his. I held my breath for a moment, then released it in a slow, measured exhale. Of course, my king. Whatever you desire. Before he could say more, my foot slipped over a loose stone. My body tilted forward, and before I could hit the ground, Ronan caught me, one arm around my waist, the other steadying my shoulder. For a moment, everything stopped. We were impossibly close, my chest pressed against his breath warm against my cheek. His grip was strong, unyielding. My pulse raced, not from the fall, but from the way his hands fit around me so effortlessly. I met his eyes, and something passed between us. A flicker of something dangerous, tempting. I leaned in, just slightly, my lips almost brushing his, testing the moment, testing him. And then, just as suddenly, I pulled back, stepping out of his hold. I'm sorry, my king, I said, placing a hand on my chest as if I had simply been startled. I didn't see the stone. His gaze lingered on me, something unreadable in his expression. Then, finally, he gave a slow nod.
That's fine. It's all right.
We continued our walk, and Ronan spoke of his fortress, his people, his family. His voice was calm, calculated, but I noticed how his gaze always found its way back to me, especially to the neckline of my dress. I glanced down subtly, pretending to adjust my bracelet. and noticed the hint of cleavage exposed. I smirked internally. Let him look. By the end of our walk, I had made my decision. I turned to him, letting my lips brush lightly against his cheek. "Good night, my king." His expression didn't change, but I saw the way his hand curled into a fist at his side. He was pleased. I was nearly at my room when I felt someone grab my arm, yanking me back against the stone wall. Brian. His eyes were sharp, burning with frustration.
What the hell are you wearing?
His voice was low, but there was no mistaking the anger in it.
What do you think you are doing?
I yanked my arm free, straightening my dress. "I have to convince Ronan. That's all." Brian let out a bitter laugh.
So what's next? You will sleep with him after wedding?
I stiffened. "It's not like that." He stepped closer, his breath hot against my skin.
Then tell me, you have other plans too?
I swallowed hard. "I don't know what you're talking about." His jaw clenched, his fingers curling into fists at his sides.
You do know, and I don't like it.
I pushed past him, my heart hammering. "I don't have time for this, Brian." He called my name as I walked away, but I didn't turn back. Inside my room, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. My dress, my hair, the way I carried myself, I looked like a queen already. But the question lingered in my mind. Was I going too far? I touched my lips lightly, remembering how close I had been to kissing Ronan. Brian would never understand. I would always be his. Wouldn't I? I sat on my bed, exhaustion weighing down on me. My eyes fluttered shut, and before I knew it, I was lost in a dream. The same dark forest from before. But this time, the woman in black was gone. Instead, I saw myself, sitting at the base of a tree, shaking, afraid. Something was coming. I could feel it. Then I saw him, Ronan. But his eyes, there was nothing there. No color, no light, just empty, hollow sockets. A cold dread sank into my bones, and then I woke up. My breath came fast, and my fingers trembled slightly as I pressed them against my forehead. This wasn't just a dream. It was something more. I whispered to myself, "What is this? Am I losing my mind? Or was there something darker at play?" The evening passed with those thoughts circling my mind. Brian, Ronan, the future I was crafting with my own hands, and the creeping fear that I was stepping into something I didn't fully understand. The morning light slipped through the curtains, painting golden patterns on the floor. I stretched lazily, my body still tangled in the soft warmth of the sheets. Last night's dream still clung to me, the hollow eyes, the eerie silence of the forest. I pushed the thought aside and climbed out of bed. Splashing cool water on my face, I stared at my reflection. My eyes looked sharper today, my lips fuller, my skin glowing in a way that even I couldn't ignore. "Slowly, Valeria," I reminded myself. "You're playing a dangerous game, and there's no room for doubt now." After a long bath, I picked a dress, something delicate yet striking. The silk clung to my waist, the deep neckline revealing just enough to make anyone look twice. It was a calculated move. As I stepped outside, the fresh scent of morning dew filled the air. The fortress was awake, warriors moving with purpose, maids rushing with trays of food. And then, I saw him. Ronan. He walked with that effortless authority, his cape flowing behind him, his gaze sharp as ever. The moment he spotted me, his steps slowed.
Valeria.
He greeted, his voice deep, laced with curiosity. I tilted my head slightly, letting my hair slip over my shoulder. Good morning, my king. His lips curled into something close to a smile.
You look radiant today.
I let out a soft laugh. Is that so? We walked together, talking about nothing and everything. His eyes lingered, betraying his growing interest. Good. I need him to want me. I need him to believe this is real. By evening, the fortress buzzed with excitement. Ronan had made his announcement. He was going to marry me. A triumphant warmth spread through me as I watched my pack celebrate. Their cheers echoed in the courtyard, their eyes filled with relief. But amidst the joy, there was one person who didn't celebrate: Brian. He stood at a distance, arms crossed, his jaw tight. He wouldn't even look at me. He'll understand soon. He has to. As the sun dipped behind the fortress walls, I made my way toward the fountains, needing a moment alone. The air was cooler here, the water reflecting the deep blue of the sky. But before I could let my thoughts wander, a familiar voice whispered near my ear, "Valeria." I turned to see Sarah, my beta. Her expression was serious, her lips pressed together. "What is it?" I asked. She hesitated before stepping closer. "Someone attacked Brian." The words slammed into me like a blow. "What?" My pulse raced. "Is he hurt?" "He barely escaped. I don't know who they were, but there were at least 4 of them. He's in his room now." I didn't wait for more details. I turned and ran. When I pushed open Brian's door, my breath caught. He was lying on the bed, shirtless, his torso wrapped in bandages. Bruises painted his arms and his lip was split. "What happened?" I demanded, rushing to his side. Brian let out a humorless laugh.
Why do you care? Go celebrate with your fiancé.
His words stung, but I grabbed his hand firmly. "Brian, stop." My voice softened. "I only love you. You know that." His jaw clenched, his gaze flickering to mine.
Then why are you doing this?
"You know why." Brian exhaled sharply, looking away.
I think it was Ronan's people.
I stiffened. "Why would they attack you?"
Maybe he don't like me. I don't know exactly.
I frowned. If Ronan had ordered this, it meant he was already suspicious. I had to handle this carefully. Leaning down, I brushed my lips against Brian's forehead. "I'll find out. I'll talk to him." He didn't stop me as I left, but the tension in the room clung to my skin like smoke. When I entered Ronan's chamber, he was reclining against the cushions, eyes half closed, as if he had just woken from a nap. He looked relaxed, dangerous. The moment he saw me, he sat up.
Valeria?
"Someone attacked my pack members." My voice was steady, controlled. His brow furrowed.
What? Who? Who did?
"I don't know," I lied. "But you need to increase security. If someone thought they were your enemies, they could try again." Ronan stood, his presence suddenly overwhelming.
Don't worry, Valeria. Your people are now my people.
He reached for my hand, his touch warm, firm.
I will take care of them.
I searched his face for any trace of guilt. There was none. If he had ordered the attack, he was hiding it well. "I hope you stand by your words," I said quietly. Ronan's grip tightened slightly.
You are mine now. Everything that belongs to you belongs to me.
His words were a warning and a promise. Then, before I could react, he leaned in and pressed a kiss to my cheek. My skin tingled where his lips touched. I took a careful step back, forcing a small smile. "Good night, my king." I left before he could say another word. The next morning, steam curled around me as I stood in the bath, the warm water trailing down my skin, My thoughts were tangled. Brian, Ronan, the attack. Everything was happening too fast. A sudden knock interrupted my thoughts. "Who is it?" I called. A deep voice answered.
Ronan.
I blinked. I'm taking a bath. Silence. Then,
I will wait outside.
I rushed through the rest of my bath, my hands shaking slightly as I wrapped myself in a thin robe. My hair dripped onto my shoulders as I pulled open the door. Ronan stepped inside, and for the first time, I saw his expression shift. His eyes darkened, his gaze lowering for just a second. I followed his line of sight. My robe was damp near my chest, the fabric clinging to my skin. Damn it! His jaw tightened. I swallowed, pretending not to notice. "My king?" He finally met my eyes.
Did I disturb you?
Not at all. I exhaled slowly. "I'm all yours." His gaze lingered again, but he said nothing. Instead, he took a step closer, his voice huskier now.
You are beautiful.
I tilted my head, letting a playful smirk dance on my lips. "Really?" His restraint was slipping. I could feel it.
The most beautiful woman I have ever seen.
His voice was rough now, edged with something primal. I ran a hand through my damp hair, watching him carefully. He wanted me. But he wouldn't have me. Not yet. Ronan cleared his throat and took a step back.
I came to tell you, I'm sending designers. You'll choose your wedding dress, the menu, the decorations, whatever you want.
I softened my voice, letting gratitude seep into my words. "You're kind, my king." His gaze flickered to my lips.
I can't wait.
I knew exactly what he was waiting for. I let my fingers graze my collarbone as I murmured, "It's just one more day, and I'll be all yours." His grip on his own control tightened, his breath hitching just slightly. Then, with a slow, lingering glance, he walked out. And I knew I had him exactly where I needed him. The castle was alive with preparations. Servants rushed through the hallways, decorating every corner with gold and crimson, the colors of Ronan's rule. The air smelled of fresh flowers, expensive perfumes, and burning candles. The entire fortress had transformed into a dreamland of luxury and royalty. I stood by the window in my room, watching the excitement unfold. Everyone was happy. At least, that's what it looked like. My pack members were blending into the celebrations, but my eyes searched for one person. Brian. I didn't have to look long. He stood near the entrance, arms crossed, face blank. His jaw was tight, his body stiff. He was forcing himself to be here, yet his presence felt heavier than anyone else's. My chest ached just seeing him like that, knowing exactly why he looked the way he did. By evening, my door creaked open. I turned, already knowing who it was. Brian. He stepped in, closing the door behind him. The glow of the candles flickered over his face, making his features sharper. His dark eyes held an emotion I couldn't quite place. Anger, pain, frustration, or maybe all three.
What was he doing in your room?
His voice was low, clipped. I blinked, confused for a second. "Who?"
Ronan.
His lips barely moved when he said the name. I sighed. "He came to talk about the wedding." Brian's jaw clenched.
Did he sleep here last night?
"No, of course not," I said quickly, stepping toward him. "You know why I'm doing this, Brian." He didn't move away, but he didn't come closer either.
I think you are forgetting me.
His words sliced through me. I reached for his arm, but he pulled away before I could touch him. Brian, I am only yours. You know that. For a moment, he just looked at me. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out. The door closed behind him, leaving me alone with a feeling I didn't want to name. The next day arrived faster than I expected. I stood before a massive mirror, dressed in an ivory gown embroidered with silver thread. The fabric hugged my body, cascading down in delicate waves. My hair was styled into soft curls, a golden crown resting on my head. Diamonds dangled from my ears, catching the candlelight. I looked like a queen, but did I feel like one? The ceremony was grand. The great hall was filled with noble guests, high-ranking warriors, and my pack members. Cheers echoed around me, but my mind was somewhere else. Brian. He stood at the back, his expression unreadable. His hands were in fists, his eyes dark and stormy. When the vows were exchanged, Ronan looked straight into my eyes, his hands firm around mine.
You are mine now.
He whispered as he slipped the ring onto my finger. And just like that, it was done. The crowd erupted in celebration, but my heart was drowning in silence. That night, Ronan carried me through the halls, his arms secure around me. I should have been thinking about Brian, about the sacrifice I was making, but instead, I found myself studying Ronan's face. The sharp angles, the piercing eyes, the sheer dominance that radiated from him. He was powerful, dangerous, and undeniably attractive. I caught Brian's gaze just before Ronan took me into his chambers. The look in his eyes was devastating. Then the door shut behind us. The room was beyond luxurious. The massive bed was covered in silk sheets, and the fireplace cast a golden glow over everything. The scent of burning wood mixed with the faintest hint of Ronan's cologne, dark and intoxicating. He placed me on the bed, his movements slow, deliberate. I was still trying to think of a way to delay this night when he knelt in front of me, his fingers gently touching the hem of my dress. I stiffened. He noticed. I can do it myself, I said quickly.
Let me.
His voice was deep, unwavering. I swallowed hard as he slid off my shoes, his fingertips brushing against my ankles. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached for my earrings, unclasping them with such patience that it made my breath hitch. This wasn't what I expected. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't tearing the gown off me like a beast. He was taking his time, unwrapping me like I was something delicate, something worth savoring. When his hands moved to my necklace, I almost stopped breathing. His fingers ghosted over my skin, lingering just below my collarbone. My mind screamed that this was wrong, that my heart belonged to someone else, but my body was reacting in ways I didn't want to admit. As his hands slowly drifted lower, I panicked. I need water, I blurted out. Ronan froze. Then, without hesitation, he walked over to the table, poured a glass, and handed it to me. I drank it too fast, nearly choking. I think I need fresh air, I added. Just for a while. I stood, ready to escape to the balcony, but before I could take a step, Ronan grabbed my wrist. In one swift motion, he pulled me against him. I gasped. His face was inches from mine. His breath was warm against my lips.
You are nervous.
He murmured. I swallowed hard. No. His eyes darkened, amused by my lie. Then he kissed my neck. It was soft at first, but as his lips traveled lower, the softness turned into something else, something deeper, more possessive. Before I could react, his hands traced down my back, pulling me even closer. His mouth moved lower, claiming every inch of exposed skin. My body betrayed me, heat rushing through me in ways I couldn't control. I wanted to stop this, but I didn't move. Then he lifted me effortlessly and laid me on the bed. The silk sheets were cool against my skin, but Ronan was warm, too warm. His fingers slid over my shoulders, pushing the fabric of my gown aside. He turned me onto my stomach, his lips trailing down my back. Each kiss sent a strange sensation through me, something that clouded my mind, something I didn't understand. A force, an energy, an invisible pull between us. I shouldn't feel this. I shouldn't want this. But I felt like something strange power was pulling me towards Ronan, like he was controlling my mind. But Ronan's touch was different than I imagined. It wasn't rushed or forceful. It was slow, intoxicating, almost worshipping. And I let it happen. I lost myself in that moment, in the strength of his hold, in the warmth of his body. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew Brian would never forgive me for this. But tonight, I belonged to my husband. I woke up to a soft glow seeping through the curtains, the warmth of silk sheets wrapped around me. My body felt light, but there was an unfamiliar soreness in certain places. As my fingers traced over my skin, memories of the night before flashed in my mind. Ronan's touch, his lips, the way he had claimed me. My stomach tightened. I turned my head, expecting to see him beside me, but the bed was empty. The scent of him still lingered on the pillows, a mix of cedarwood and something darker, more intoxicating. I pulled the blanket closer, suddenly aware that beneath it, I had nothing on. A wave of panic hit me. I threw the blanket aside and rushed to the bathroom. My breath caught in my throat when I turned to the mirror. Red marks trailed down my neck, my shoulders, my stomach. The evidence of last night was written all over me. My fingers hovered over one of the deeper marks near my collarbone. How was I supposed to hide this? I stepped into the shower, letting the warm water wash away the traces of last night. But no matter how hard I scrubbed, the marks didn't fade. They weren't just on my skin. They were in my mind, in my body, in the way I felt this morning. Different. When I stepped out, I wrapped myself in a robe and walked toward the closet. Today, I needed to be careful. I picked a long-sleeved dress with a high neckline, deep blue in color, something elegant but modest. As I slipped it on, I checked myself in the mirror. No marks were visible. Good. But the real problem wasn't the marks. It was Brian. What was I going to tell him? Would he even believe me if I said I had no choice? My hands clenched into fists. I was doing this for us, for our future. He had to understand. Taking a deep breath, I walked out of the room, heading straight for Brian's quarters. But when I got there, he wasn't inside. Where was he? I turned back, searching the halls, but before I could take another step, a firm hand caught mine.
My queen.
Ronan's deep voice filled the corridor.
Had you done your breakfast?
I swallowed hard, forcing a calm expression. I was just about to. Without waiting for my response, Ronan led me toward the grand dining hall. I felt the weight of his fingers wrapped around mine, strong, possessive. A lavish breakfast was spread across the long table, golden plates glimmering under the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. I wasn't in the mood to eat, but my stomach had other plans. I picked up a piece of fruit, forcing myself to take small bites, pretending everything was fine.
I have some matters to attend to,
Ronan said after a few moments, wiping his hands with a cloth.
I will see you in the evening.
And just like that, he was gone. The room was empty. I barely had a second to breathe when Brian walked in. The moment our eyes met, I knew this wasn't going to end well. His gaze was sharp, unreadable. He took slow steps toward me, hands in his pockets, his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might snap. Then, without breaking eye contact, he said in a low, cutting voice.
So how was your night?
My throat dried up.
You made it memorable, didn't you?
The accusation in his voice felt like a knife to my chest. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What could I even say? That I didn't want it? That I had no choice? Would he believe me? Brian, please, I finally managed. I'm doing this for us. Don't doubt me. He let out a bitter chuckle.
Don't doubt you?
He leaned in, his voice dropping lower.
Tell me something, Valeria. Did you sleep with him?
I sucked in a sharp breath. It doesn't matter. Brian scoffed.
It doesn't matter?
His fingers curled into fists. I see. It's just a week, right? And then we'll be together? I reached for his hand, trying to reassure him, but he pulled away, shaking his head. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. I sat there for a while, staring at the untouched food on my plate, my appetite completely gone. Later, when I returned to my room, I nearly gasped. Brian was already inside. What are you doing here? I whispered, quickly closing the door behind me. My heart raced. Brian, I'm married now. You can't be here. If anyone sees us... He didn't let me finish. He walked up to me, eyes burning with frustration, his voice strained.
Valeria, I love you.
I exhaled shakily. I love you too, but you have to trust me. His gaze softened, just for a second.
I trust you.
Then before I could react, he kissed me. I turned my head away. Not here, Brian. It's not safe. But he didn't stop. He kissed me again, and his hands moved to the edges of my dress. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped back instinctively, my heart hammering against my ribs. If he saw the marks... I swallowed hard. Brian, I have to tell you something. His hands stilled. His eyes searched mine.
Don't tell me.
His voice cracked slightly.
Don't tell me you slept with him.
I stayed silent. That was enough. His face twisted in pain before he suddenly yanked my dress down from my shoulders. His eyes fell on the marks, the deep ones near below my collarbone, the faint ones trailing down my stomach. His breathing turned uneven. He stepped back like he'd been burned.
I can't believe you.
He whispered.
You did it.
His voice grew rough.
Maybe you're enjoying all of this. Maybe you don't want to leave this place anymore.
Tears burned the back of my eyes. Brian, please, listen to me.
I listened, Valeria.
He snapped.
I trusted you.
His chest rose and fell as he clenched his jaw.
But I was a fool.
I reached for him, but he stepped away.
Tell me,
His voice was hoarse.
was it you? Did you have me attacked so you wouldn't have to leave this palace?
I recoiled like he had slapped me. What? No! How can you even think that? He let out a bitter laugh.
I don't know what to think anymore.
He looked at me one last time, his gaze lingering on the marks Ronan had left. Something dark flickered in his eyes. Disgust. Betrayal. Then, without another word, he walked out. I stood there, frozen. My hands trembled as I reached for the marks on my skin, the evidence of last night. Had I really done something so unforgivable? I thought of Brian, of Ronan, of the choices I had made. And for the first time since this all began, I wasn't sure what I was fighting for anymore. I stepped back, pressing my spine against the cold door, locking it from inside. My hands trembled as I exhaled, the weight of Brian's stare still burning into my skin. He had looked at me like I was someone else, someone unrecognizable. Maybe I was. Maybe I had become the woman he feared I would be. But I wasn't doing this for pleasure. I wasn't doing this to betray him. I was doing this for us. I sank onto the bed, my body aching, not just from exhaustion, but from the war raging in my mind. Brian would never look at me the same way again. I knew it. No matter how much I tried to explain, he would always see me as the woman who had shared a bed with another man, even if that man was my husband. I ran my fingers over the silk sheets, remembering the night before I came to this place. The night Brian and I had spent together in my den, where his arms had been my shelter, where I had whispered to him that I would always be his. But now, everything was different. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to push away the guilt, the regret. When I opened them again, an hour had passed. I sat up quickly. I had no time to waste. If Brian had even the slightest bit of love left for me, I had to hold on to it. I could still fix this. I had to. And there was only one way. I had to take him and leave this place. I would steal gold from the fortress, enough for us to run far, far away. Enough for my pack to escape too. We didn't belong here, caged under Ronan's rule. I would give Brian the future he deserved, the future I promised him. Without wasting another moment, I rushed toward Brian's room. But when I pushed the door open, it was empty. I searched for him in the halls, my bare feet making no sound against the polished stone floors. The entire place was unusually quiet, not a single servant in sight. No guards, no Ronan. Then I saw it, a bottle of wine sitting on a table in the corner of an empty hall. The cork had been pulled out, and the deep red liquid gleamed under the flickering candlelight. I stepped closer. It smelled rich and smooth, a scent that made my throat dry with longing. I wasn't much of a drinker, but tonight, I needed something to clear my mind. I picked up the bottle, poured a glass, and took a sip. The taste was exquisite, warm, slightly sweet, with a hint of something unfamiliar. I took another, then another. My limbs felt heavy. My head spun, but it wasn't the normal kind of dizziness that came with drinking. It was something else entirely. Something was wrong. I blinked, trying to focus, but my vision blurred. My body felt sluggish, my eyelids unbearably heavy. I barely had time to whisper Brian's name before everything turned black. I woke up to the sound of voices, angry, loud, accusing. My head throbbed, my mouth dry as sandpaper. My fingers dug into dirt, cold and damp beneath me. I forced my eyes open. People surrounded me, their faces twisted with horror and disgust. Their voices clashed against each other, all yelling, all blaming. Then I saw them. Bodies, scattered across the ground, lifeless, motionless. Some I recognized. Some I had known my whole life. My pack. I gasped, scrambling to my feet. My dress was torn, sticky with something dark and thick. I looked down. Stains. Red stains. My hands, my arms, my face, all covered in it. A sharp cry escaped my throat. No! No! What happened? Who did this? The crowd shouted back at me. Monster! She destroyed them! Arrest her! I shook my head violently. No! I didn't do anything. I was drinking wine in the hall. I don't know how I got here. Then I saw him. Brian. He stood at the edge of the crowd, his face pale, his lips slightly parted. I ran to him. Brian, you know me! Tell them I didn't do this! His eyes met mine, filled with something I couldn't read.
I want to believe you,
He said, voice low.
but how do I explain this to them? Look at you.
I did. And I saw what he saw. I was covered in stains. I didn't even know whose. But Brian turned toward the crowd, his voice rising above theirs.
She is innocent. She wouldn't.
No one listened. They had already made up their minds. Then Ronan appeared. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable.
Valeria,
He said, his tone softer than I expected.
what have you done?
I shook my head frantically. Nothing. I swear. My king. I was in the hall. I had some wine. And then, I don't know. Someone must have. Ronan's gaze darkened.
And yet here you are, stained, surrounded by these bodies.
I felt sick. This wasn't happening. This had to be a nightmare. Then his men stepped forward.
My king,
One of them said.
the law demands she be imprisoned. No trial is needed.
The crowd roared in agreement. Ronan didn't look at me. He hesitated for only a second. Then he gave the order.
Take her.
Brian didn't say another word. No one did. I was dragged away. The prison was dark, damp, and smelled of rust and old death. Thick, heavy chains wrapped around my wrists and ankles, binding me to the cold stone floor. My dress was still sticky, still stained. I hadn't even been given the chance to change. I stared at the small, barred window high above me. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. One moment I had been planning my escape. The next I was here, accused of a crime I didn't even remember. But someone had done this. Someone had framed me. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember. The wine, the strange taste, the way my body had felt so weak. Someone had drugged me, and now they had made sure I was the villain. I had no idea who it was, but I would find them, and when I did, they would pay. But first, I had to get out of here. Would Brian help me? Did he still believe in me, even after what he saw? Would Ronan? I had no answers. But I did know one thing. I wasn't going to die in this prison. The cold stone walls of my cell seemed to close in on me, each passing moment amplifying my despair. The chains around my wrists and ankles were heavy, biting into my skin, a constant reminder of my captivity. My mind raced, replaying the events that led me here. How had everything spiraled out of control so quickly? Suddenly, the creak of the heavy wooden door pulled me from my thoughts. I looked up to see Ronan entering the dimly lit room. His presence was imposing, his expression unreadable.
Tell me everything.
He demanded, his voice echoing off the walls.
Maybe I can help you.
I met his gaze, searching for any sign of compassion. I haven't done anything, I pleaded. Someone else did this and framed me as a monster in front of everyone. Ronan's eyes narrowed.
Who is that person?
I don't know, I admitted, frustration evident in my voice. Maybe someone who doesn't like me. He sighed, running a hand through his hair.
I'm trying to rescue you, but I need proof. This is a huge claim. If I free you without evidence of your innocence, the people will hate me. They might protest against me and question my position as alpha.
I nodded, understanding the precariousness of his situation. Okay, I understand. But please, do it quickly. Ronan stepped closer, his demeanor shifting.
I missed you so much, my love.
Before I could react, he leaned in and kissed me. I recoiled slightly, taken aback. My whole body is covered in stains. I need a bath at least. He dismissed my concern.
I will manage.
His lips trailed down my neck, but now slowly I felt myself feeling good, like something was pushing me toward him. It felt strange that even in this situation I was feeling good with Ronan, his intentions clear. I was shocked that even in this dire situation, his desires took precedence. But slowly I started enjoying. I never knew why, but his touch was so good. Every time he came near me, close, I always felt like I needed him. I didn't know for what reason, but I felt like that something is there through which maybe he was controlling me. He continued, undeterred, and after satisfying himself, he stood up and left without a word. As the door closed behind him, the moment he left, my good feelings vanished suddenly, like I was free from his hypnosis. Now it felt wrong. A realization washed over me. Ronan wasn't here out of concern for me. His visit was driven by his own selfish needs. He was more of a monster than I had ever imagined. He hadn't even thought to bring me water to clean myself. Tears of frustration and pain welled up in my eyes. I wondered why it felt so good when Ronan was with me, and why it feels so wrong when he left the room. Ronan uses some powers or something? Moments later, the door creaked open again. This time, a masked man entered. He moved silently, his presence both mysterious and comforting. He appeared wealthy, his attire suggesting nobility, yet he didn't seem to belong here. He sat beside me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder.
I've brought some food for you, some water to drink, and some to clean yourself.
He said softly.
But you must not tell anyone. Trust me, I will rescue you soon. Don't ask who I am, okay?
I tilted my head, trying to discern his identity. At first, I thought he might be Brian, but his stature and the richness of his clothing suggested otherwise. Brian could never afford such luxury. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice trembling with gratitude. The masked man gave a slight nod and left as quietly as he had come. Time passed slowly. Neither Brian nor Ronan visited me. I couldn't help but wonder why Brian hadn't come to see me. Was he so repulsed by the marks Ronan had left on me? The last meal I had was from the masked man, and hunger gnawed at my insides. Exhausted, I lay on the cold floor and drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning, the door opened again. Ronan entered.
I miss you so much.
He said, his voice dripping with feigned sincerity. I looked up at him, my eyes filled with a mix of anger and desperation. "If you miss me, why don't you rescue me from here?" He didn't answer. Instead, he approached and began kissing me. I turned my head away. "What are you doing? We should do this in bed. Free me first." Ronan ignored my pleas, continuing his advances. He kissed my neckline, which suddenly felt very good. I was like in his control. I couldn't believe this, but I was feeling so good. My body didn't protest it. I felt his deep muscles in my lower abdomen. It was so good. But suddenly I noticed that his eyes were not blinking, not even once. And then I noticed that his sclera was black. I was shocked. There was something very wrong about him. Then he finished the task, and he left without a word, leaving me feeling loved. The moment he left, I realized that it wasn't good. It was so wrong. But why I didn't wanted to resist him? Why I started enjoying him? What is happening? Did he done something to me? What was in his eyes? I was furious with Ronan, but more so with myself for being in this situation. A short while later, the masked man returned. "When will you free me?" I implored. "I can't live here. Tell me, who are you? Why do you want to help me?" He hesitated before speaking.
I know you're innocent. It was Brian who did this to you. You have to believe me.
Shock coursed through me. "What are you talking about? That's impossible."
It's true.
He insisted.
Brian mixed something in your wine. He planned it with someone close to Ronan's family. Ronan isn't involved, but he's not an innocent one, as you've likely realized by now.
His gaze drifted to the marks on my thighs. I adjusted my dress, covering myself. "How do you know all this? Are you a spy?"
Not a spy.
he replied.
You'll know my identity when the time comes.
He handed me some food, which I devoured hungrily. After he left, I spent the day in solitude, my mind racing with questions and doubts. That night, Ronan returned. I can't, I said firmly. He feigned ignorance.
What?
I know why you're here. I can't do this. Either free me or leave me alone. Ronan laughed, a cold, menacing sound.
I am the king, you fool. I can do whatever I want.
He approached, intent on having his way, but before he could touch me, the masked man appeared silently behind him. With swift precision, he administered a substance that rendered Ronan unconscious. The masked man quickly freed me from my chains. Why didn't you free me earlier? I asked, rubbing my sore wrists.
Today is a celebration.
He explained.
Everyone is distracted. It's the perfect time to escape.
Celebration? What kind?
Brian, your boyfriend, is marrying Ronan's nephew.
The news hit me like a blow. What? That can't be true.
We don't have time to discuss this. We must leave now.
I nodded, understanding the urgency. Let's go. He led me toward the window. Not from there, I protested. We're a level above the ground. We could get injured.
We'll transform,
he said calmly. Transform? You mean...
Yes, I am a werewolf. My name is Geralt, but that's not all. There's more you need to know, but it must wait. Let's escape first.
Without another word, Geralt began to transform into a massive silver-black werewolf. I followed suit, shifting into my werewolf form. Together, we leaped from the window, landing gracefully on the ground below. As we made our escape, a guard spotted us and raised the alarm.
Someone is escaping,
he shouted. The fortress erupted into chaos as guards pursued us. Geralt signaled for me to take a different route to confuse them. We weaved through the forest, our paws pounding against the earth, hearts racing with adrenaline. After what felt like hours, we finally lost our pursuers. We reached a quiet town. My hands were still trembling slightly, the events of the past hours replaying in my mind like a broken record. I turned to look at the man who had saved me, Geralt. He stood near the wooden table, his hands pressed against the surface, his head slightly tilted down as if lost in thought. He was tall, his broad shoulders casting a shadow that made him seem even more imposing. The cloak he wore hung loosely over his frame, and the hood he had earlier used to conceal his identity now rested against his back. You saved my life, I finally spoke, my voice softer than I intended. I don't know who you are, but you are an angel to me. He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head slightly.
Not an angel,
he said, his voice deep and steady.
You'll have to help me with something.
A request, not a demand. That alone intrigued me. Help you with what? He turned to face me fully. His eyes were sharp, unreadable, yet there was something in them. Pain, maybe? Determination?
Ronan is not the rightful alpha.
He stated.
He stole the position. He was never meant to rule.
I stared at him, confused. What are you talking about? Geralt sighed, stepping closer, and for the first time, I noticed the way his jaw tensed, the way his fingers curled slightly, as if suppressing a deeper rage.
That fortress,
he said,
was mine. It belonged to my father before me. Ronan was my cousin. He was greedy, power-hungry. He was never capable of leading, not like my father. So he took another path. He turned to witchcraft.
The way he said it sent a strange unease through me. Witchcraft. The very word carried a weight of darkness. Geralt continued, his voice steady but laced with something heavier. Regret, maybe?
He became stronger than me, stronger than my father. And when he had enough power, he destroyed my father, framed me as a monster, and took everything that was mine.
I swallowed, trying to process what he was saying. "But you're alive," I said slowly. "If he wanted you gone, why didn't he finish you?"
He did worse.
Geralt muttered.
He made sure I was seen as a villain. He drugged me with his witch's potions, twisted my mind, made me do things I don't even remember. And when I finally realized what was happening, it was too late.
The back of my neck tingled, the quiet fury in his stance.
But Ronan made a mistake.
He added, lifting his gaze to mine.
He thought he had full control. He didn't realize the witch he worshipped was the one controlling him.
I took a step closer, my instincts battling between curiosity and wariness. "The witch?" Geralt gave a slow nod.
She's the real enemy. If we can destroy her, Ronan will be vulnerable. He's nothing without her power.
I exhaled, my fingers tightening around the fabric of my sleeve. "That's insane," I whispered, then let out a humorless laugh. But I guess I'm not in a position to call anything insane anymore. Geralt studied me, his expression unreadable.
Brian betrayed you, didn't he?
The mention of his name sent a dull ache through my chest. "I don't know anymore," I admitted. "Maybe I betrayed him first, but I did everything for him. For me. And he still..." I stopped myself, shaking my head. "It doesn't matter." Geralt let a moment of silence pass before speaking again.
I was imprisoned just like you.
He said, his voice lower now, almost hesitant.
Years ago, but I escaped. I never left the fortress, though. I became one of them, a guard in disguise.
That caught my attention. My eyes searched his face. "How did Ronan not recognize you?" A flicker of something unreadable crossed his gaze before he lifted a hand to the edge of his mask. Slowly, he removed it. I sucked in a breath. His face. Half of it was burnt, the skin scarred beyond recognition. Before I could reach out, before I could even react, he turned away.
Don't,
he murmured. Something heavy settled in my chest. "Geralt," I started, but he cut me off.
I did it myself.
He admitted.
So no one would recognize me, especially Ronan.
The weight of his words settled over me like a thick fog. He had destroyed his own face to survive, to fight back. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "What do we do now?" Geralt exhaled, his gaze shifting toward the lantern's glow.
We find her first.
"The witch?"
Yes.
He turned back to me.
She lives in the forest behind the fortress.
A shudder passed through me, but I held my ground. "And then?" Geralt hesitated.
Before we go, you need to drink my...
I blinked. "Excuse me?"
My red fluid is different. It can increase your power. If you drink it, you'll stand a chance against her.
I let out a breathy laugh. "I'm not a vampire, Geralt. I'm a werewolf."
I know.
He said, a small smirk playing at his lips.
But it works on werewolves too, even humans. It's the only way you'll be strong enough to face her.
I narrowed my eyes. "Why can't you defeat her yourself?" His smirk faded.
Only a female could destroy her.
And there it was, the real reason he had saved me. "You didn't help me out of kindness," I said, crossing my arms. "You needed me." Geralt didn't deny it.
I told you.
He said simply.
I'm not an angel.
I studied him, the sharp lines of his face, the way his jaw tensed as if waiting for my rejection. I exhaled. "Fine, I'll do it." Geralt's shoulders relaxed slightly.
Good, but we need to move. If Ronan finds us before we find her, we're dead.
I ran a hand through my tangled hair. "I don't think he'll come after me." Geralt let out a dry chuckle.
You're right, he doesn't care about you.
"Just my body," I muttered, bitterness creeping into my voice. Geralt's expression darkened.
But he will come for me.
I glanced at him, suddenly aware of how much danger he was in. "Then we better hurry," I said. His lips quirked slightly.
I know a place, a rented flat, safe for now.
I nodded, determination settling in my chest. Let's go. Geralt reached for his cloak, throwing it over his shoulders before glancing at me.
Valeria,
He said, his voice softer this time. I looked at him.
whatever happens next,
He said.
don't trust anyone, not even me.
I held his gaze for a long moment. I don't trust anyone anymore, I admitted. The room was small, too small. After the grandeur of the fortress, everything looked dull, lifeless. The walls were plain, the air smelled faintly of old wood, and the bed creaked when I sat down. Now everything looks so cheap after that fortress, I muttered, running my fingers along the rough bedsheet. Geralt leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching me with an amused look.
It never matters where you live. What matters is who you live with and how satisfied you are with yourself and your life.
I exhaled, tilting my head to look at him. You're right, I admitted, a small smile tugging at my lips. You know, I lost so much in the past month. He walked toward me, slow and steady, like he had all the time in the world. When he stood close, his voice softened.
I know. I saw most of it. You can't change what happened, but you can change what comes next.
Hope so. I stood up and stretched my arms. My body ached, covered in the filth and sweat of everything I had been through. I needed a bath, desperately. I need to clean up, I said, heading toward the bathroom. The moment I stepped inside and closed the door, reality struck. I had no clothes, just the tattered, stained dress clinging to my skin. I hesitated for a second before stepping back out. Do you have any clothes? Geralt let out a short laugh.
Do I look like I carry women's dresses around?
I sighed. Point taken.
Give me a few minutes, I'll buy some for you.
Thanks,
Want to come with me?
he asked, smirking. I pointed at my dress. In this?
Right, I'll be back.
He walked out, leaving me alone. I stared at the bathroom door, then at my hands. I was covered in dirt and dried stains. The thought of waiting made my skin crawl. Screw it. I turned on the warm water and stripped, stepping under the flow. The heat melted the grime off my skin, washing away more than just the physical dirt. It washed away the exhaustion, the weight of everything I had been carrying. I grabbed a soap bar from the corner and lathered myself twice, scrubbing until my skin smelled fresh again. The scent was simple, clean, nothing like the rich perfumes I had once worn. When I finished, I wrapped myself in a towel and ran my fingers through my damp hair, shaking out the excess water. A knock at the door.
Valeria?
Come in. Geralt stepped inside, holding a paper bag. I stretched out one hand from the bathroom and took it. The fabric was soft between my fingers. I pulled out a dress, light, elegant, beautiful. Not something a man would buy on a whim. Even now, after everything, he was still rich. I got dressed quickly and stepped out. Geralt was sitting on the edge of the bed, watching me. His gaze was unreadable, but when he spoke, his voice carried something deeper.
You're beautiful.
He said.
Now I see why the king fell for you so easily.
I rolled my eyes. Flattery doesn't suit you.
I wasn't trying to flatter you.
I didn't respond. Instead, I dried my hair and lay down, letting exhaustion pull me into sleep. When I woke up, the room was dim, the sun barely peeking through the curtains. Geralt was sitting near the bed, holding a cup of coffee.
For you.
He said. I took it, the warmth spreading through my palms. Thanks. After a sip, I asked, What's next? His expression shifted.
You need to grow stronger.
I placed the cup on the nightstand. I'm ready. Without hesitation, he took out a small object and made a shallow cut on his palm. The scent of his red fluid filled the air as he let a few drops collect in a glass. Then he handed it to me. I hesitated. It smells salty,
It is.
he said.
You can drink as much as you need.
I met his gaze before lifting the glass to my lips and drinking. The taste was unlike anything I had ever consumed. My body responded immediately. Energy pulsed through me, subtle but powerful. Dinner arrived, simple but warm. We ate in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Then, Geralt stretched.
That's enough for today. Get some rest.
I glanced at the bed, then at the couch. Where are you sleeping?
Sofa.
He replied. There's enough room on the bed. He raised an eyebrow.
Are you sure?
I nodded. Yes. He hesitated for a moment before walking over. He lay down beside me, keeping his distance, but I could feel his warmth. As he slept, I watched him. The way his chest rose and fell, the relaxed expression on his face. He looked different like this. Peaceful, vulnerable. For a moment, a strange thought crossed my mind. What if I ran away? Started over somewhere new? But then I remembered. He had saved my life. He had been the only one who hadn't betrayed me. His mouth was slightly open. I reached out and gently pushed his jaw closed. Then I turned over and tried to sleep. Morning came, and when I opened my eyes, the bed was empty. The sound of water running came from the bathroom. A moment later, Geralt stepped out, wearing only a towel. His hair was damp, water droplets sliding down his lean, muscular chest. His biceps flexed slightly as he dried his face with another towel.
Oh,
He said, pausing.
I thought you were still asleep.
I quickly turned away. Sorry.
I'll change in the bathroom.
I swallowed. It's fine. By the time I turned back, he was already dressed.
Breakfast?
He asked. I stood up. Yeah, just give me 10 minutes. I prepared myself for outing. We stepped outside, the cool morning air brushing against my skin. A small coffee shop stood at the corner. We ordered coffee and some snacks, sitting by the window. For the first time in weeks, I felt normal. On the way back, I glanced at him. So, what about my power supplement? He smiled, taking out the small blade again. This time, when he cut his palm, I didn't wait for him to collect it. I grabbed his wrist and brought it to my lips. He tensed.
What are you?
Relax, I smirked. I'm not a vampire. I pressed my lips against his skin, drinking directly from the cut. The taste was still strange, but I was getting used to it. When I pulled away, I licked the corner of my mouth. All done, I said. Geralt exhaled.
You're impossible.
We talked for a while. About Ronan, about the witch. He made jokes, teasing me, making me laugh in a way I hadn't in a long time. Then I paused. You know what? I said softly. Today is my birthday. Geralt's eyes widened.
What?
I smiled, but it felt hollow. Yeah. He stood up, grabbing my hand.
Let's go.
I frowned. Where?
Anywhere you want.
I hesitated. But
No buts.
he pulled me up.
Come on, Valeria, it's your birthday.
I stared at him, at the determination in his eyes. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a woman running from her past. I felt like someone who could still have a future. Today was my birthday, and honestly, I wasn't expecting much. Birthdays were never a big deal for me. No fancy parties, no surprise gifts, just another day on the calendar. But then there was Geralt. Geralt entered a cloth shop, and after a few minutes he returned to me. A mischievous smile playing on his lips. his deep brown eyes twinkling like he was up to something. I asked, "What's is that?" Geralt said.
Come with me.
He took me to the room.
Happy birthday, Val.
He said, handing me a small paper bag. I peeked inside and found a neatly folded t-shirt with the words "Birthday Girl" written in bold, glittery letters. I laughed, holding it up. "This is so cheesy," I teased.
That's the point.
He smirked.
Now go change. We're going out.
I raised an eyebrow. "Where?" He only grinned.
Trust me.
We stepped outside. Geralt booked a cab and we reached. I stood at the entrance of a massive amusement park, my eyes wide in disbelief. The smell of caramel popcorn, fried churros, and cotton candy filled the air, mixing with the sounds of excited screams from roller coasters and cheerful laughter. I turned to Geralt.
You deserve a day where you don't have to think.
He said, shoving his hands into his pockets.
Today's about fun. No responsibilities, no stress. Just you and me.
I couldn't stop the smile tugging at my lips. Okay then, let's do this. We started with the Ferris wheel. As we rose higher, I caught a glimpse of the entire park, the dazzling colors, the tiny figures running around below us. "Wow," I whispered. Geralt glanced at me.
You've never been to an amusement park before?
"Never like this," I admitted. "Not with someone who makes it feel special." His expression softened, but before he could say anything, the ride stopped at the very top. The city stretched out in the distance, the sky painted in warm hues of orange and pink.
You know,
He said, resting his elbow on the safety bar.
this is the part where people kiss in movies.
I laughed. "You watch too many movies." He shrugged.
Maybe.
After trying every thrilling ride we could, Geralt pulled me toward an arcade. The place was buzzing with flashing lights, beeping machines, and the sounds of coins dropping.
I'm about to show you my hidden talent.
He said, cracking his knuckles in front of a claw machine. I folded my arms, watching. "Go on, then." He moved the joystick carefully, his tongue slightly sticking out as he concentrated. I held my breath as the claw descended, grabbing a stuffed panda, only to drop it at the last second.
Damn it.
He muttered. I burst out laughing. "Hidden talent, huh?"
Okay, that was just practice.
He dug into his pocket for more tokens. We went from game to game, racing each other in car simulators, shooting zombies side by side, and competing in air hockey. I screamed when he barely beat me, his triumphant smirk infuriating. "Best out of 3, I demanded. By the time we walked out of the arcade, my cheeks hurt from laughing so much. I hugged the stuffed panda he finally won for me, feeling something warm bloom in my heart. Geralt led me to a cozy restaurant with dim lighting and a view of the city. It was the kind of place that felt intimate, where time slowed down. We slid into a booth, and he reached for the menu.
What are you in the mood for?
He asked. "Something delicious," I said. He chuckled.
A girl after my own heart.
We ordered way too much. Pasta, steak, fries, and a massive slice of chocolate cake.
You have something here.
He said, reaching over and brushing his thumb against the corner of my lips. My breath hitched. The way he looked at me, his fingers lingering for just a second too long, it did something to me. I quickly grabbed my napkin. "Thanks." Geralt leaned back, his smirk never fading.
You're cute when you're flustered.
"I am not flustered." He raised an eyebrow.
Sure.
After dinner, he took my hand and led me into a club. The music was loud, the neon lights flashing in vibrant blues and purples. I wasn't much of a dancer, but Geralt? He had a confidence that made it look effortless.
Come on.
He said, pulling me onto the dance floor. "I don't know how to dance."
Good news. Neither do half the people here.
The music pulsed through me, and after a couple of drinks, I found myself letting go. Geralt spun me around, his hands resting on my waist, his touch light but firm.
You're having fun, aren't you?
He murmured close to my ear. I tilted my head back, laughing. More than I should be. He smiled, and for a moment, everything else faded. It was just the two of us, moving in sync, his fingers tracing slow circles on my back. I wasn't sure how much time passed, but when I finally leaned into him, a little unsteady from the drinks, he whispered.
Let's get you home.
Geralt walked me to our rented room, a small but comfortable space with a kitchen and a bathroom. As soon as we stepped inside, I kicked off my shoes and flopped onto the couch, letting out a content sigh. I don't think I've ever had this much fun in my life, I admitted. Geralt leaned against the doorframe, watching me.
That was the goal.
I sat up, my head slightly spinning. Why'd you do all this? He walked over, crouching in front of me.
Because you deserve it. Because I wanted to see you smile like that.
I swallowed. Geralt. He reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered for a moment, his gaze dropping to my lips. For the first time all night, my heart wasn't racing because of the rides or the music. It was because of him.
Sleep.
He murmured, standing up.
We'll talk tomorrow.
I wanted to say something, but my eyelids were already heavy. As I drifted off, I felt the warmth of his presence beside me, the quiet reassurance that, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone. And that, maybe, I never had to be again. I woke up to the soft glow of morning light slipping through the thin curtains. My body felt oddly relaxed, my mind still lingering in the haze of last night's celebrations. A small smile crept onto my lips as I stretched, my fingers brushing against the cool sheets beside me. Geralt was still asleep, his chest rising and falling steadily. His dark hair was tousled, his sharp features softened in sleep. He looked peaceful, something I rarely saw on him. Not wanting to disturb him, I slid out of bed and padded toward the bathroom. The cold water against my face jolted me fully awake, washing away any lingering drowsiness. As I stared at my reflection, I caught the faintest hint of color on my cheeks. Last night had been unexpected. I had never celebrated my birthday like that before, never felt that kind of happiness. I exhaled, shaking my head. Don't overthink it. After freshening up, I stepped back into the room and walked over to Geralt. He was still fast asleep, his lips slightly parted. I hesitated, then leaned down, brushing my fingers lightly over his shoulder. Geralt, I said softly. Wake up. He stirred, brows drawing together before his eyes fluttered open. For a second, he just blinked at me, as if trying to place where he was. Then, a slow, lazy smile spread across his face.
Good morning, Valeria.
He murmured, his voice husky from sleep. Good morning, I replied, stepping back. Come on, get up. I'll make us some coffee. As he sat up, running a hand through his messy hair, I made my way to the small kitchen area. Within minutes, the rich aroma of coffee filled the room. I handed him a cup, settling down beside him with mine. He took a sip, his eyes meeting mine over the rim of his cup. You really made my day yesterday, I admitted, holding my mug between my hands. I never knew birthdays could be that full of life. My pack wasn't like this, and I spent most of my birthdays in the forest. I didn't even know what celebrating like that felt like until now. Geralt studied me for a moment before his lips curved slightly.
You're welcome.
I took a slow sip of coffee, then hesitated before asking, Did I do anything mischievous last night? His lips twitched.
Not at all. You weren't exactly in control, but you didn't do anything bad, if that's what you're worried about.
I exhaled. Good. I trust you, Geralt. His eyes flickered with something unreadable before he simply nodded. Setting my cup aside, I looked at him expectantly. Now, my supplement? He sighed, rolling up his sleeve and extending his arm toward me. But I smirked and shook my head. I need an upgrade. His brows furrowed.
And what does that mean?
Open your shirt? Geralt stared at me like I had lost my mind. What? I let out a small laugh. Relax, I haven't fallen for you, if that's what you're worried about. He exhaled through his nose, giving me a look, but unbuttoned his shirt anyway. His skin was warm, the muscles beneath it tensed slightly as I stepped closer. I placed my palm lightly against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath my touch. Then, tilting my head, I leaned in, my teeth grazing his left side before sinking in gently. His body stiffened for a second, but he didn't move. The warmth spread through me as I took what I needed, my body instantly feeling stronger. After a few moments, I pulled back, licking my lips. Does it hurt? I asked, searching his face.
A little.
He admitted, voice low. I stepped back. Thank you. For a moment, silence stretched between us, something thick lingering in the air. Then Geralt spoke.
Valeria, I need to ask you something.
I tilted my head. Go ahead. His fingers tightened slightly around his coffee cup.
Do you feel obligated to help me?
His voice was careful, but I caught the hesitation beneath it.
The witch is powerful. I don't know if you'll succeed or not, but one thing I do know now, I don't want to lose you. Friend or whatever I am for you, I can't stand the thought of that.
Something deep inside me twisted. I met his eyes, searching them. Geralt, you're more than a friend to me. We might not know every little thing about each other, but we trust each other. You saved me. You've made my life better. Helping you get rid of that witch is the least I can do. His jaw tensed.
I don't want you involved in danger. If you're unsure, you can step back. I'll handle it on my own.
I shook my head. Don't worry. I'm ready. And if I need help, I'll ask you. Something flashed across his face, but before I could read it, he sighed.
All right.
I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him. For a moment, he didn't react. Then his hands rested lightly on my back. The warmth of his skin seeped into mine, steady and grounding. After a second, he pulled away.
I have to go.
I frowned. Where?
Somewhere.
Shall I come?
It's personal.
I narrowed my eyes. You have a girlfriend or something?
No,
Then why not let me come? He exhaled.
it's not like that.
I crossed my arms. Are you hiding something?
Valeria, please.
His voice was tight.
I can't talk about this right now.
He stood and headed toward the door, but I reached out, grabbing his wrist. What's the matter? Did I do something wrong? He turned back, his gaze dark and unreadable.
No, you didn't do anything wrong, but I did.
What do you mean? There was a pause. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said,
I've developed feelings for you.
My breath caught.
I like you, Valeria.
He continued, his voice rough with emotion.
Every time I look at you, I'm afraid of losing you.
Before I could even process his words, he closed the distance between us and kissed me. His lips were warm, firm, urgent. My mind went completely blank. I didn't pull away, but I didn't kiss him back either. My heart felt like it had stopped altogether. Then, just as suddenly, he stepped back, raking a hand through his hair.
I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I thought, never mind, I'm an idiot.
I swallowed hard. I don't know what to say. My voice came out barely above a whisper. Can we just have breakfast? Geralt's eyes flickered with something unreadable before he nodded.
Yeah, let's go.
We walked in silence to a nearby food vendor. The scent of fresh bread and eggs filled the air. We sat down and ate quietly, the tension between us thick but unspoken. On the way back, Geralt glanced at me.
Your lips clean them.
I frowned, wiping at my mouth. Is it sauce?
Yeah,
I wiped again. Gone? He smirked.
not at all.
I huffed. Then just clean it yourself. He reached out, his fingers brushing my lips as he wiped it off. His touch lingered for just a second longer than necessary, his gaze darkening slightly before he pulled away. And then, just like that, his entire body stiffened. His expression changed, like he had seen something that froze him in place. I followed his gaze, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Geralt's sharp eyes followed the man in the distance, his expression unreadable. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see without being obvious. The man was dressed like any other commoner, but there was something off about the way he moved, too controlled, too aware of his surroundings.
Valeria, I think that man is one of King Ronan's guards.
Geralt murmured, his voice low but firm. I frowned, studying the man for another second. Yeah, I think so, I admitted. Geralt's jaw tightened.
Do you think he's searching for us? In normal clothes, acting casual?
That doesn't matter, I whispered. If he is, we can't afford to stick around and find out. We should move before we get noticed. Geralt didn't argue.
Let's head back first.
We left the marketplace, keeping our pace steady, our movements natural. Inside, I could feel the tension building in my chest, but I forced myself to act normal. The last thing we needed was to look suspicious. By the time we reached our rented room, the weight of paranoia had settled over us like a thick blanket. Geralt shut the door behind us, locking it. I moved quickly, closing the curtains and securing every window. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound in the room was our breathing. Then Geralt turned to me.
Valeria, I realize something now.
He said slowly.
Have you ever felt like Ronan has control over you?
A strange, unwelcome memory surfaced. How I had tried, over and over, to resist Ronan. But every time, something in me betrayed my own will. My body wanted to stay, even when my mind screamed to run. Yes, I admitted hesitantly. Whenever I tried to push him away, my mind and body, they pulled me closer instead. I never understood why. Geralt exhaled sharply.
That's because of his dark magic. He has the power to make people want him, to bend their will.
So that's why. Those moments when I felt weak, drawn toward him against my own wishes, they weren't just my emotions betraying me. He had been using magic to control me. I swallowed hard. That explains a lot. Geralt watched me carefully.
Knowing this, do you still think you're ready to go to the witch?
I met his gaze. Yes. My powers have been growing. I feel stronger now. I need answers, Geralt. I need to know how to break whatever hold Ronan has over me. He studied me for a long moment before nodding.
Then we'll go tomorrow.
But there was one problem. We can't stay here any longer, I said. It's too risky. Geralt thought for a second.
You mean another city?
I shook my head. No, we should go somewhere no one will look for us, somewhere hidden. A realization crossed his face.
The forest.
I replied yes. He agreed without hesitation. That night, we left the town behind and made our way deep into the nearby woods. It was quiet here, untouched. The thick canopy above barely let the moonlight slip through, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine. We sat on the ground, surrounded by towering trees. We had brought enough food so we wouldn't need to return to town for a while. For the first time in a long time, there was a strange kind of peace in the silence. I let out a slow breath, hugging my knees. I miss my pack, I admitted. my voice softer than I intended. Geralt glanced at me. His expression remained unreadable, but his presence alone was enough.
You're not alone, Valeria.
He said simply. Something about the way he said my name made my chest tighten. The night stretched on, and we sat by the fire, eating in comfortable silence, until a low, eerie howl echoed through the trees. I stiffened. What was that? Geralt's eyes darkened, but before he could answer, the sound of movement broke through the night. Then, out of the shadows, they came. 3 werewolves. It happened too fast. The largest of them lunged at me before I could even shift. I barely had time to react, but before its claws could tear into me, Geralt was already there. In the blink of an eye, he transformed, his body shifting effortlessly into his powerful werewolf form. The speed of it startled me. It was as if he had been born to fight, like shifting was second nature to him. His claws tore into the attacking wolf before it could touch me. The other 2 snarled and lunged forward, but I was already shifting now, my own wolf form taking over. I leapt into the fight, joining Geralt. And that's when I realized something. I had underestimated him. Geralt moved with a level of skill I had never seen before. His strikes were precise, calculated. He wasn't just fighting. He was dominating. He took down 1 wolf in mere seconds, his strength unmatched, and together, we won. The moment the last wolf fell, I shifted back, catching my breath. Geralt did the same, his breathing heavy but controlled. I turned to him, staring.
It's not safe here.
He said, his voice steady despite the fight we had just survived. Something inside me wavered. Why do you care so much about me? I asked before I could stop myself. He didn't hesitate.
I already told you.
I wanted to press further, to ask him what he truly meant by that. But instead, I stayed quiet and started walking. We made our way toward the witch's forest. The deeper we went, the colder it became. It wasn't just the night chill. This was unnatural. I rubbed my arms. Why is it so cold all of a sudden? Geralt's expression darkened.
It's the witch. Her presence makes this entire area freeze.
I exhaled, my breath visible in the air. I don't know if I can handle this kind of cold,
We'll make a fire.
he said without hesitation.
We'll manage.
He gathered some wood, and soon a small fire crackled between us, casting flickering light over his face.
Better?
He asked. A little. We sat there, the silence between us stretching. There was so much I wanted to say, but for now, I just let the warmth of the fire and the presence of the only person I could trust bring me comfort. Tomorrow, I would face the witch. But tonight, I rested. The fire crackled softly, throwing flickering shadows over the cold ground. But it wasn't enough. The freezing air clung to my skin, biting into my bones despite Geralt's heavy coat wrapped around me. I turned to him, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest as he lay beside me. His breath was steady, peaceful. He looked so different like this, calm, unguarded. It made something inside me stir. I shook his shoulder. Geralt, wake up. His eyes fluttered open, groggy but alert in an instant.
What is it?
I'm freezing. He sat up, rubbing a hand through his thick, dark hair, then reached for the fur-lined coat draped over him. He pulled it off and handed it to me without hesitation. I took it and wrapped it around myself, but the cold still seeped through. Time dragged on, and my body refused to warm up. My fingers felt numb. My skin was ice. After a while, I shifted closer. I'm still cold. Geralt sighed, his breath visible in the crisp air.
It's just a few more hours till dawn. Try to bear with it.
I hesitated before asking, if I take my supplement, will it heat my body? His gaze flickered, knowing exactly what I meant.
Yes, significantly.
I didn't wait. I moved closer, lifting my fingers to the buttons of his shirt. Open your shirt. Geralt tensed.
It's too cold for that.
Ignoring him, I slid my hands over his chest, undoing the buttons one by one. His skin was warm beneath my fingers, firm and strong. I felt his breath hitch, but he didn't stop me. Leaning in, I pressed my lips to his bare chest, inhaling his scent, earthy, wild, and something uniquely him. Then I bit down gently, my sharp teeth piercing his skin. Geralt exhaled sharply, but he didn't pull away. The moment his red fluid touched my tongue, heat rushed through my veins, spreading like wildfire. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, like liquid fire melting the ice inside me. I sucked slowly, my lips lingering against his skin. And then, without thinking, I kissed the spot where I had bitten him. Geralt stiffened, his hands clenched at his sides. I did it again, this time softer, lingering a little longer. His voice came rough, low.
Valeria.
I didn't answer. Instead, I tangled my fingers in his hair, gripping the strands at the nape of his neck and pulling him toward me. A soft sound escaped him. Not pain, not resistance, but something else entirely. My nails dragged lightly down his chest, tracing the lines of muscle before I bit his bottom lip. His breath caught, and for a split second, he was utterly still. Then I kissed him, wildly, deeply, like a storm crashing against the shore. Geralt didn't move at first, like he was caught off guard, but then his hands found my waist, his fingers pressing into my hips. His lips moved against mine, slower than mine, softer. It wasn't enough. I grabbed his wrists and guided his hands to my hips, pressing my body closer to his. His warmth seeped into me, chasing away the cold, but I wanted more. I kissed his neck, his shoulder, my teeth scraping against his skin, leaving tiny marks as I went. I tugged my coat off, letting it drop carelessly to the ground. The thin strap of my dress slipped off my shoulder as I moved, exposing the curve of my collarbone and more. Geralt's hands tightened slightly, like he was holding himself back. I pulled him closer, pressing his lips against my heart, then lower. A sharp gasp left me, but before he could move further, I hauled his hairs from the backside wildly. I tilted his chin up and crashed my lips back to his, our breaths mingling in the cold night air. My fingers worked at the waistband of his trousers, desperate, impatient. He let out a quiet breath, his eyes searching mine as if asking for something. But I wasn't waiting for permission. I pushed him back onto the ground, my body flush against his. My waist and back were moving faster than he ever imagined. I was wild. Heat, raw and consuming, spread between us. The fire nearby crackled, but it was nothing compared to the wildfire burning inside me. Geralt was warm, solid, steady beneath me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely, utterly alive. The night stretched on, filled with breathless gasps, tangled limbs, and whispered names. By the time dawn approached, I lay against his chest, my body spent, my heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about survival. I wasn't thinking about the past, or the dangers ahead, or even the witch waiting in the distance. All I could think about was the man beside me, and the way his arms wrapped around me, holding me like he never wanted to let go. Then after some time I said, "I am going." Geralt asked.
Now?
I replied, I had lived the best night of my life as well as the best day of my life. Now it's my turn to prove my capabilities. Now it's not only about you, it's about us. Before Geralt could say anything, I stood up, adjusted my dress, and kissed on his lips and walked. The forest stretched endlessly before me, tangled with thick vines and gnarled roots that clawed at my ankles like the hands of the dead. The wind whispered secrets I didn't want to hear, and the moon barely peeked through the twisted branches above. Every step I took felt uncertain, but I kept going, feigning exhaustion, letting my shoulders slump just enough to make it believable. I had to sell this performance, or I wouldn't live to see the next sunrise. Ahead, nestled in the heart of the cursed land, stood her domain, a decayed fortress draped in blackened ivy, its towering spires piercing the sky like knives. A chill, not of the night, but of something ancient and cruel, slithered through the air. I sucked in a slow breath and forced a tremble into my voice as I called out, "Please, someone help me!" Nothing. I took another step forward, my boots crunching against the brittle leaves. I'm lost. I have nowhere else to go. A shadow moved in the distance. I caught the faintest shimmer of dark silk, the rustling of fabric that carried a presence colder than the grave. Then, just as the silence thickened into something unbearable, a voice slithered through the air. "Who dares wander into my domain?" I forced my eyes to widen, let my breath quicken, and swallowed hard before falling to my knees. The witch. She emerged from the darkness, her gown flowing like black smoke, her presence pressing against me like a heavy weight. The moonlight barely touched her, as if even the heavens feared her wrath. I stammered, making my voice shake. "I was betrayed. I have nothing left. He lied to me." I lowered my head, gripping the damp earth beneath my fingers. Geralt. He made me believe we were one, that I was his partner in battle, his equal. But he used me. He took everything and left me for dead. I lifted my face, making sure my eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I want revenge. The witch tilted her head, studying me, her pale lips curving into a knowing smirk. "And you come to me of all creatures? For help?" "You're the only one who can teach me true power," I whispered, my voice laced with desperation. "I'll serve you. I swear it. I'll prove my loyalty. Just teach me." She laughed, low and sharp. It wasn't amusement. It was something darker, something that made my skin prickle. "Swear it," she said, stepping closer, the scent of burning roses clinging to her like an omen. "Swear that you will serve me, that you will obey without question, that your loyalty is mine, and mine alone." I swallowed. This was it, the moment that would determine whether I walked away with her secrets or lost my life in the attempt. "I swear," I murmured, lowering my head in submission. "I will serve you." The witch watched me, her eyes like molten silver, searching for the slightest crack in my deception. Then she smiled. "Very well," she said, circling me like a predator. "Then let us begin." Days turned into weeks, and under her ruthless guidance, I learned more about witchcraft than I ever thought possible. She didn't hold back. Her methods were brutal, her lessons etched into my bones with pain and precision, forced me to harness energy from the earth, the moon, the very air around me. She taught me how to manipulate shadows, how to weave illusions so tangible they could drive a man to madness. I played the role well, the devoted apprentice, the obedient servant. I listened. I watched. And in doing so, I discovered her secret. Her power wasn't just magic. It was tethered to something deeper, something ancient. Her heart. Not the one in her chest, the real one, the one she had ripped from herself and hidden away, a heart that could be destroyed. I didn't react when I learned the truth. I kept my head bowed, my voice even, but inside, my mind was already crafting a plan. I needed Geralt. One evening, when the witch was deep in her dark rituals, I slipped away, stepping into the night like a phantom. The moment I reached the clearing beyond the fortress, he was there. Geralt, waiting in the shadows, his broad frame tense, his piercing eyes locked onto mine.
You've been gone too long.
He murmured, his voice edged with both relief and urgency. I stepped closer, reaching out, fingers grazing his arm, grounding myself in the warmth of his presence. I found it, I whispered. Her heart. It's buried beneath an old coffin, deep within the ruins beneath the fortress. His jaw tightened.
Then we take it and end this.
There's more, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Her heart can't be destroyed by just anything. There's only one weapon that can do it, a sword, one that belonged to the man who betrayed her. It's buried with him, in the cemetery at the edge of the cursed lands. Geralt's gaze darkened.
You're asking me to walk into the resting place of the damned and retrieve a weapon cursed by betrayal?
I held his stare. Yes. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his lips.
Sounds like a terrible idea.
I exhaled. It's the only way. He studied me for a moment longer before nodding.
Then I'll get the sword. But be careful, Valeria. If she suspects you...
She won't, I assured him. Not until it's too late. We held each other's gaze, the weight of our plan settling between us. There was no turning back now. As I slipped away into the night, back toward the fortress, I knew one thing for certain. This battle wasn't just about power. It was about deception. And I intended to win. I kept my breathing steady, my hands folded in my lap as I knelt before the witch. A thick candle flickered beside me, casting long shadows against the ancient stone walls. The air smelled of burning herbs and something metallic. She was testing me again. The witch sat across from me, her silver eyes glowing in the dim light. "Repeat the incantation," she commanded, her voice slithering around the room like smoke. I obeyed, letting the foreign words slip from my lips, smooth and controlled. Every syllable was a step deeper into her world, a reminder that I had to be convincing. I had to make her believe I was hers. She watched me, silent, unreadable. Then, with a flick of her wrist, the candle between us flared into a tall, twisting flame. "You are learning quickly," she murmured, amusement curling in her tone. "Perhaps too quickly." I kept my face blank, my body relaxed. "I want to be strong," I said. "I want to be useful to you." Her gaze lingered on me, searching, peeling away at my mask, but I didn't waver. I couldn't. Finally, she smiled, slow and knowing. "Then prove it." A dagger appeared in her hand, as if summoned from the darkness itself. She flipped it between her fingers, then extended it toward me. "Destroy something for me," she said. My stomach tightened. "What?" She motioned toward the iron door at the far end of the room. With a wave of her hand, it creaked open, revealing a man bound in chains. His face was bruised, his breath shallow. He looked at me with wild, pleading eyes. "A thief," the witch said, "caught sneaking into my domain." She leaned forward, her lips curving. "Destroy him, and I will trust you." I forced my fingers to close around the dagger, willing my hands not to shake. The weight of the cold metal pressed against my palm, heavy with expectation. This was a test. I took a slow breath and rose to my feet, approaching the prisoner. His body trembled, and I could hear his heartbeat stuttering in his chest.
Please.
He whispered, his voice raw. I met his gaze, and in that moment, I knew what I had to do. With swift precision, I slashed the dagger downward, cutting through the chains instead of his flesh. The witch hissed, fury flashing across her face, but before she could react, I spun toward her, dropping to my knees. "He is weak," I said quickly, tilting my head in submission. "Destroying him would be merciful, but keeping him? He could serve you." She narrowed her eyes. "You dare question my command?" "I dare to serve you wisely," I countered, keeping my voice firm but respectful. "He can be useful. Let me break him for you." For a long, tense moment, the room was silent. Then, the witch let out a low chuckle. "Clever girl." She waved a hand, and the prisoner vanished in a swirl of dark mist, taken away by her magic. I exhaled silently. She didn't know it, but I had just saved a life, and bought myself more time. The moon was high, casting silver streaks over the graveyard as I knelt beside the coffin. My fingers trembled slightly as I traced the edge of the stone, feeling the ancient carvings worn smooth by time. This was it. The witch's heart was buried beneath this cursed ground, pulsing with dark energy, feeding her strength. I could almost feel it humming beneath my palm, like a living, breathing thing. Geralt crouched beside me, his breath slow and controlled. He was dressed in dark leather, his blonde hair tousled from the long journey back. The sword he retrieved from the cemetery, the weapon that once belonged to the witch's treacherous lover, gleamed in his grip. Its hilt was warm, as if carrying the echoes of its past. This was the only thing that could destroy her for good. I took a deep breath and whispered, "This is our only chance. She's powerful, but she won't expect me to strike first." Geralt's sharp blue eyes locked onto mine.
She already suspects something. We have to move fast.
I gave a small, humorless smile. "Then let's make this betrayal worth it." We had planned everything carefully. Geralt would distract the witch while I made my move. But plans had a nasty habit of falling apart when faced with real danger. A sudden gust of wind roared through the graveyard, carrying the scent of burnt herbs and something metallic. The air crackled, and then she appeared. The witch. Her long, dark robes billowed as she stepped toward us, her black eyes gleaming with unreadable emotion. The moonlight painted her pale skin in an eerie glow, making her look almost ghostly. "Ah, Valeria," she said, her voice smooth but laced with poison. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" I forced a look of confusion onto my face, playing my last desperate trick. "Find out what?" She let out a sharp, mirthless laugh. "Oh, my dear, you were such a promising student. I almost believed you." Her eyes flickered to the sword in Geralt's grip, and her expression twisted with fury. "But now, I see, you're just like him." Her fingers twitched, and a wave of energy slammed into me before I could react. It was like being hit by a force of nature. My body lifted off the ground and crashed into the cold earth. Pain exploded in my ribs, but I gritted my teeth and pushed myself up. Geralt was already moving, charging at her with the sword raised high. But the witch was faster. With a flick of her wrist, vines shot up from the ground, wrapping around Geralt's legs, yanking him back. He struggled, his muscles straining, but the more he fought, the tighter they coiled. "You thought you could use me?" she snarled, stepping toward me. "You thought you could destroy me." "Foolish girl." I wiped the liquid from my lips and met her gaze, my mind racing. She was stronger, but I knew her weaknesses. She underestimated me. "I never wanted to destroy you," I said, rising slowly. I wanted to free you." Her expression wavered for a fraction of a second. Doubt. That was all I needed. I closed my eyes and focused, summoning the dark magic she had taught me. It surged through my veins, wrapping around my fingers like invisible strings. When I opened my eyes, I saw her staring, realization dawning too late. I thrust my hands forward, releasing the magic in a sudden, violent burst. The ground shook beneath us as the force slammed into her, sending her staggering back. Geralt freed himself from the vines, rolling to his feet, his grip tightening on the sword.
Now!
He shouted. I didn't hesitate. My body moved on instinct, sprinting toward the coffin, toward the buried heart. The ground was loose. I dug my fingers into the dirt, clawing, scraping, until I felt it. A box, old, wooden, pulsing with unnatural warmth. The witch screamed in rage, her power surging like a storm. Geralt barely dodged a blast of fire as he lunged at her, keeping her focus away from me. I ripped the box open, and there it was, her heart. It wasn't a normal heart. It was blackened, twisted, barely resembling anything human anymore. It pulsed weakly, as if sensing its doom. My fingers tightened around the sword. This was it. The moment everything would change. I raised the blade, hesitating for only a second. The witch's eyes snapped toward me, and for the first time, I saw fear. "No!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You don't understand!" But I did. And I didn't care. With a swift, merciless strike, I drove the sword through her heart. A horrible, ear-piercing scream tore through the air. The witch's body convulsed, her magic spiraling out of control. The sky darkened, the wind howled, and then she collapsed. Her body hit the ground, her eyes wide, unseeing. The power that once held the kingdom in fear faded into nothingness. Silence. Geralt stood there, his chest rising and falling, his knuckles white around the hilt of his sword. His gaze met mine, something unreadable in his expression.
It's over.
I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Not yet. We had one last thing to do. We returned to the fortress under the cover of darkness. Ronan's soldiers were already in disarray. Some of them had turned against him, siding with Geralt. The battle was swift and brutal. Ronan was no coward. He fought fiercely, his golden armor glinting under the torches. But he was nothing without the witch's magic. His strength was failing. Geralt was the one to strike him down. A clean, final blow. The once mighty king fell to his knees, his reign of terror ending in a pool of his own blood. The kingdom was finally free. But something felt off. After the battle, I searched the fortress for Brian and his wife. They were gone. Geralt stood beside me, his expression unreadable.
He'll come back.
I knew he was right. Brian wasn't the type to accept defeat. He was out there, watching, waiting. I took a deep breath and turned to Geralt. Then we'll be ready. I did wrong, but that doesn't give him the authenticity for framing me as a monster like he did. I must give him a better lesson. He gave a slow, knowing smile.
Yes, we will.
And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace, even if the battle wasn't truly over. A sudden, searing pain shot through my chest, sharp and unnatural, like claws sinking into my heart. My breath hitched, my body jerked. It wasn't just pain. It was something deeper, something wrong. Then I noticed Geralt was not there. Nobody was there. It was so strange. I pressed a trembling hand against my chest, trying to steady myself, but the sensation only worsened. My ribs felt like they were expanding and contracting in unnatural waves, like something inside me was trying to break free. My skin burned, tingling with an eerie energy that didn't belong to me. What was happening? Panic gripped me as I forced my eyes downward. A dark shadow crawled beneath my skin, swirling like ink in water, spreading across my chest in eerie patterns. The veins near my heart pulsed black, twisting like writhing tendrils. I sucked in a sharp breath, my heartbeat slowing, thick and heavy, like it wasn't mine anymore. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a reaction to exhaustion or the night's intimacy. And then it hit me. The witch. You don't understand. I thought she was just trying to scare me, trying to protect herself. But what if she wasn't? What if she was warning me? No. What if she had done something to me? My heart clenched, then expanded, stretching in a way it shouldn't. My skin felt too tight, my bones too fragile against whatever was awakening inside me. The realization settled in my stomach like ice, slow and paralyzing. I wasn't just different. I was changing. I was becoming something else. The dark power was inside me now, growing, feeding, waiting. I curled my fingers into the fur beneath me, fighting to steady my breathing. Then suddenly someone said,
Hey, are you all right?
Then I saw Geralt. I hugged him tightly, but all dark feelings and atmosphere were gone. Would I become like the witch? Would my heart twist and blacken until I was no longer myself? Would I become a danger to him? The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through me. Geralt trusted me. He had given me his warmth, his body, his breath. And now? Now I was something unknown, something unnatural. I swallowed hard, forcing down the nausea clawing at my throat. I hesitated, just for a second. Then I forced a smile, pushing the panic deep into the pit of my stomach. Yes, I lied, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. I'm better now. He sighed, closing his eyes again. I exhaled slowly, staring up at the sky, at the stars that now felt impossibly distant. I didn't know what was next. But for now, I would hide this. For now, I would keep my secret buried in the darkness. And the best thing I know is that I love Geralt, and I will never let him in danger, and I will never leave him.